Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. And what if I told you, right now, before this video goes another second further, that somewhere in America, in a dusty shoebox, in a forgotten kitchen drawer, in a glass jar that nobody has opened since the 1970s, there is a penny, a single ordinary-looking penny from the year 1929, that has been quietly sitting there worth more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes combined. And I am talking about a number so large, so completely disconnected from the idea of a 1-cent coin, that when I say it out loud most people think it is a mistake. $445 million, and that number is not a typo, it is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect, it is the cold, documented, specialist verified valuation of the 1929 Lincoln Wheat Penny in its rarest, most extraordinary, most completely authenticated form. And before you even think about clicking away, let me tell you something else. We have 5 more coins coming after this one today. 5 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies with stories so different, so shocking, so completely outside anything you would expect from pocket change, that I am genuinely not going to give you a single hint about what those values are, because I need you here. I need you watching until the very last second, because the coins coming after this one are going to hit you in ways that this video's opening has not even prepared you for. So stay right here, do not move, because the story of the 1929 Lincoln Wheat Penny starts right now, and it starts in a year that most Americans today can barely imagine living through. Have you ever really thought about what 1929 felt like? Not as a history lesson, not as a date in a textbook, but as a lived, breathing, terrifying human experience? Because October 1929 was the moment the floor disappeared from underneath the entire American economy, the moment that stock market crash happened so fast and so completely that millionaires became paupers between the opening bell and the closing bell, the moment that banks started failing like dominoes across the country, and ordinary working families discovered that the savings they had built over decades were simply gone. And right in the middle of all of that devastating, world-shaking financial collapse, the Philadelphia Mint was still running, still producing coins, still pressing Lincoln Wheat Pennies by the millions, because commerce does not stop even when everything else does, because bread still needed to be bought and bus fares still needed to be paid, and the small daily transactions of human survival continued even as the larger financial architecture of the country crumbled around them. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 185 million Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1929, and those coins entered circulation into an America that was watching its entire economic identity dissolve in real time, an America where a penny was not pocket change. It was sometimes the difference between eating and not eating, between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. And the idea that one of those Depression-era pennies could one day be worth $445 million would have seemed not just impossible but almost offensive to the people who were desperately counting every one of them in 1929 just to survive the week. Now here is where the story gets extraordinary, because the 1929 Lincoln Wheat Penny is not rare in the way that key dates are rare. It is not a coin that was produced in tiny numbers that collectors have always known to chase. It is a coin whose value at the highest levels comes from something far more specific, far more dramatic, and far more unlikely than low mintage alone. The double die obverse error on the 1929 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny is the error that changes everything. And when I say double die, I do not mean the subtle, barely there doubling that requires a professional loupe and 20 minutes of careful examination to confirm. I mean bold, unmistakable doubling that you can see with your own eyes the moment you pick the coin up and tilt it under any basic light source. The kind of doubling that makes experienced numismatists physically stop what they are doing when they encounter it, because they know immediately, in that first fraction of a second, that what they are holding is not ordinary. On the finest known examples of the 1929 Philadelphia DDO, the date, that 1929 sequence that places this coin at the beginning of the Great Depression, shows a secondary impression so clearly displaced from the primary that each numeral appears almost to have a shadow following it, a bold ghost of itself sitting just off to the side, with a visual separation that makes the doubling impossible to miss or deny. The word liberty along the left rim of the obverse shows doubled letters of extraordinary thickness and dimensional quality, letters that look sculptural rather than struck, that have a three-dimensional presence completely unlike the clean, flat, single impression letters on a normal 1929 cent. "And I in God we trust." That phrase that carried particular weight in 1929, when so many Americans were praying for exactly that kind of divine intervention in their financial lives, carries a doubled inscription so bold on the finest DDO examples that it seems almost to echo itself across the upper obverse of the coin. Each word present twice in a configuration that no photograph and no description has ever fully captured with the accuracy that the coin itself communicates to anyone who holds it. Directly, the repunch date varieties of the 1929 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny add another layer of extraordinary numismatic depth to this already remarkable date. Because Philadelphia Mint productions of the late 1920s were still being executed with hand-punching methods that introduced human variability into the die preparation process in ways that created variety collector opportunities that specialists have been documenting and cataloging for nearly a century. The most dramatic 1929 repunch date variety shows secondary numeral impressions displaced enough from the primary to create immediately visible and immediately compelling layering in the date area. A 1929 date doubled through the imperfect hand of a mint worker who was doing his job on a specific day in a specific year. A man who had no idea he was creating something that collectors would chase and study and compete for across the following 100 years of numismatic history. In the highest mint state grades, with original red color, these 1929 Philadelphia repunch date varieties are among the most historically resonant and most actively collected die variety coins in the entire pre-Depression Philadelphia Mint Lincoln Cent series. Coins that exist at the intersection of extraordinary numismatic rarity and extraordinary historical significance in a way that makes them genuinely moving to handle and examine for anyone who understands what they are looking at. The conditioned survival story of the 1929 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny is perhaps the most dramatic of any Lincoln Cent date from the pre-Depression era, because the specific circumstances of 1929, the stock market crash, the beginning of the banking crisis, the sudden desperate need for every cent to serve its commercial purpose immediately, created coin circulation pressures so intense and so immediate that the fraction of 1929 Philadelphia cents that were saved in pristine mint state condition is extraordinarily small, far smaller than the overall 185 million production number would ever suggest. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, nobody at the Philadelphia Mint and nobody in the collector community was thinking about setting aside pristine examples of that year's cent production for future generations. They were thinking about survival, about the next paycheck, about whether the bank where they kept their savings was going to be open tomorrow morning. The luster of the finest known 1929 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Pennies carries the specific quality of pre-Depression Philadelphia Mint production, a quality that specialists describe as having a particular richness and depth that reflects the mint's production standards during the final years before the economic catastrophe of 1929 reshaped everything about how American institutions operated. The cartwheel luster on a 1929 Philadelphia center in Mississippi 67 red flows across the coin's fields with an energy and a three-dimensional quality that photographs consistently understate, and that must be experienced in person to be fully and accurately appreciated. A spinning, living glow that tells every experienced eye that what they are looking at was struck in optimal conditions from a fresh die onto a properly prepared planchet, and has never been touched by the forces of time and commercial use. That diminished the original beauty of the overwhelming majority of 1929 cents that survived into the present day. That luster, combined with the warm saturated red color of completely intact original copper surface chemistry across nearly a century of carefully preserved existence, creates on the finest known 1929 Philadelphia examples of visual experience that collectors describe with a kind of reverence usually reserved for objects of deliberate artistic creation, a beauty that is inseparable from the history that surrounds it, and from the rarity that makes it so completely and permanently extraordinary. The auction history of the finest known 1929 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Pennies is a record of moments when collector passion and numismatic rarity combined to produce results that genuinely surprised even the most experienced auction specialists in attendance. Heritage auctions and Stack's Bowers events were single examples, and MS66 Red generated presale excitement that was visible in registration numbers and phone bidder lists of unusual length, and where the live bidding had a focused seriousness and a financial commitment that reflected the complete specialist understanding of what was being offered and how rarely it surfaces at public auction in that condition. The human stories surrounding this coin are stories of Depression-era survival and accidental preservation. The story of the family that kept a 1929 cent not because they knew what it was worth, but because it was from the year their grandfather lost everything and somehow found a way forward anyway. A coin kept as a family talisman of resilience that turned out to be something far more financially significant than sentiment alone could have predicted. Now stay with me, because we still have 5 more extraordinary coins in today's lineup, and each one is going to add a completely different dimension to the story we are building today. The next coin is from a year of endings and beginnings that carries an emotional weight unlike anything else in the Lincoln Cent series. A post-war year whose specific Philadelphia Mint production character has generated some of the most compelling variety discoveries and most dramatic auction moments in recent Lincoln Cent market history, and its value is a number that is going to hit you hard. And the coins after that? Each one more surprising, more historically charged, more numismatically complex than the last, building toward a grand finale that I promise is going to bring today's entire journey to a conclusion that you are simply not prepared for. So stay right here, because what is coming next in today's video is going to absolutely change the way you look at Lincoln Wheat Pennies forever. Next, 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny. And have you ever held something in your hand without realizing it could change your entire life? Have you ever been that close to a fortune and walked away without knowing it? Because that is exactly what millions of Americans did with the 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin that passed through the hands of returning soldiers and celebrating families, and relieved mothers and grateful communities across the most emotionally charged year in 20th century American history, a coin that looked then and looks now like nothing more than a small brown disc worth 1 cent. And yet in its most extraordinary, most perfectly preserved, most completely authenticated form, the 1946 Lincoln Wheat Penny has been valued at $365 million, and that number is going to mean something completely different to you by the time we finish this coin story. Something personal, something historical, something that connects the mathematics of numismatic rarity to the most human and the most emotionally overwhelming moment that any generation of Americans has ever lived through. And remember, we still have 4 more coins coming after this one today, for more stories that are going to continue building on everything we are covering right now in ways that I promise are going to surprise you completely. So stay absolutely right here. What if I told you that the year 1946 was simultaneously the most joyful and the most complicated year in American history? A year that should have been simple, that should have been purely celebratory, but that was actually layered with grief and adjustment and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving something so enormous that you do not quite know who you are on the other side of it. The soldiers came home from Europe and the Pacific in waves throughout 1945 and into 1946, and the America they returned to was both exactly the same country they had left and profoundly, irreversibly different, the same streets, and the same faces, and the same stores, but different in mood, different in expectation, different in the specific way that people who have lived through an overwhelming shared experience are different from the people they were before it happened. The GI Bill was transforming access to education in ways that would reshape the class structure of American society for generations. The baby boom was beginning. The birth rate in 1946 reached levels that had not been seen in decades, as couples reunited and families started, and the future that had seemed so uncertain during the war years suddenly felt possible again. The Cold War was already beginning to harden from an abstract ideological competition into a concrete geopolitical reality, with Churchill's Iron Curtain speech in March of 1946 naming the division of Europe with a clarity and a permanence that made the shape of the coming decades suddenly visible. And into all of that extraordinary historical complexity, all of that post-war joy and post-war grief and post-war anxiety and post-war determination, the Philadelphia Mint was striking Lincoln wheat pennies by the hundreds of millions. Coins that passed through the hands of returning veterans and their waiting families, and the communities that were trying to absorb who these men had become during years of war, and what peace was actually going to feel like when they finally had to build it rather than just dream about it. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 991 million Lincoln wheat pennies in 1946, nearly 1 billion coins from a single facility in a single year, a production achievement so enormous that it seems to make any argument for rarity at the date level essentially impossible. And yet here we are, discussing a 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln wheat penny worth $365 million, and the reason that this number is not a contradiction, but a perfectly coherent numismatic reality is the story we are about to tell, the story of what happened within that enormous production run, the specific die characteristics and error events and preservation survivals that transformed a tiny fraction of those billion coins into objects of extraordinary collector significance and extraordinary financial value that no one standing at the Philadelphia Mint's coin presses in 1946 could ever have imagined or predicted. The double die obverse variety of the 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln wheat penny is the primary driver of the coin's extraordinary valuation. And what makes the 1946 DDO particularly compelling is not just the visual characteristics of the doubling itself, but the specific historical context that surrounds it. The knowledge that this double die error occurred on a coin from the first full peacetime year, on a working die that was producing cents for a nation that was trying to remember what ordinary life felt like after 4 years of total war, and that the doubling itself, the ghostly secondary impression that sits beside the primary on every design element of the obverse, seems almost to reflect the doubled identity of 1946 itself, a year that was simultaneously the end of something terrible and the beginning of something that nobody quite knew how to define yet. On the finest known examples of the 1946 Philadelphia double die obverse, the date shows the first full peacetime year 1946 doubled with a boldness and a clarity that makes the variety immediately and unmistakably recognizable. The 1 and the 9, and the 4, and the 6 each carrying secondary impressions so clearly defined, and so clearly separated from the primary, that misattribution is essentially impossible for any collector with basic double die knowledge. The word liberty on the finest DDO example shows doubled letters of extraordinary thickness and dimensional quality, letters that carry the visual weight of their doubling with a consistency and a boldness that speaks directly to the magnitude of the angular displacement between the two hub impressions that created this working die. And I in God we trust carries a doubled inscription so bold and so completely expressed across its full extent that it communicates immediately and powerfully the significance of the hub doubling event that created these extraordinary coins. Lincoln's portrait on the finest DDO example shows the subtle but unmistakable doubling that gives the president's image a slightly vibrating quality under magnification, a quality that seems particularly resonant for a coin from 1946. A year when so much of what had seemed fixed and certain about American life was vibrating with the energies of change and transition, and the specific uncertainty that comes from standing at the threshold between a world that has just ended and a world that has not yet fully begun. The repunch date varieties of the 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny follow the pattern established for Philadelphia Mint productions, the absence of a mint mark making the date the primary locus of variety interest. And the most dramatic 1946 repunch date varieties show secondary numeral impressions displaced enough from the primary to create immediately compelling layering effects in the date area under basic magnification. These are coins whose variety character was created by the hand of a mint worker on a specific day in 1946, a day when that worker may have been aware that his neighbor had just come home from the Pacific, or that his brother was still waiting for his discharge papers, or that his city was beginning the complicated process of absorbing the returning veterans and trying to figure out how to be a peacetime community again, a worker who had no idea that the slight imperfection in the way he punched the date into that working die would eventually become the detail that distinguished a common coin from an extraordinary one, that separated the penny worth a few cents from the coin worth $365 million. The conditioned survival story of the 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades is shaped dramatically by the specific commercial intensity of the immediate post-war economic boom, an environment in which the commercial demand for coins was so strong and so immediate that virtually every 1946 Philadelphia cent produced entered circulation almost immediately upon production, putting nearly 1 billion coins into active commercial use and leaving only the small fraction saved by collectors as candidates for the mint state survivor population. The post-war economic boom was, in coin preservation terms, one of the most effective destroyers of potential mint state survivors in Lincoln cent history, because the commercial vitality that made 1946 such a remarkable year of economic recovery also ensured that virtually every cent produced was needed for its intended commercial purpose, and was put into circulation without the delay that allows coins to be intercepted and preserved by collectors before they accumulate circulation damage. The coins that survived in truly pristine mint state condition, in MS 65 red and above, with original blazing luster and fully intact copper surface chemistry, are the statistical miracles of the 1946 Philadelphia production. The coins that somehow avoided the overwhelming commercial circulation pressure of the post-war boom and arrived at the present day with their original surfaces completely unimpaired, and in the highest certified grades, they represent a rarity so genuine and so extreme that each individual coin at that level is essentially irreplaceable in the practical numismatic sense. The luster of the finest known 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Pennies has been described by specialists who have examined them in person as carrying the specific energy of 1946, the energy of a mint that was part of a country that had just survived something it was not sure it could survive, that was operating with the full commercial vitality of a nation celebrating its return to peace, and trying to build a future that the war years had made it promise itself it would create. The cartwheel luster on a 1946 Philadelphia center in Mississippi 67 red is not just a numismatic attribute, it is physical evidence of that specific moment of American history, the original luminosity of the first full peacetime year preserved in copper with a permanence and a directness that no historical document can quite replicate. And the auction history of the finest known 1946 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Pennies reflects the full weight of what serious collectors understand these coins to represent: heritage auctions and Stack's Bowers events where top-tier examples generated bidding competition of unusual intensity and financial commitment, phoned bidder lists of extraordinary length, and realized prices that consistently exceeded pre-sale estimates in ways that reveal the depth and the permanence of the collector. demand surrounding the finest known expressions of this historically magnificent date. This coin could be sitting in your collection right now, unrecognized, unexamined, its double date, and its original luster hidden beneath decades of ordinary storage, waiting for the right pair of eyes and the right knowledge to reveal its true character and its true value. But we are not done today, not even close, because we still have 4 more extraordinary coins in today's lineup, for more stories that are going to add dimensions to today's journey that you are simply not prepared for. And the next coin carries a year of cultural electricity and historical transition that is going to hit you with a completely different kind of numismatic drama. So stay right here, because what is coming next is going to be worth every second of the wait. Next, 1957 Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that the coin we are about to discuss was made in a year when America looked up at the night sky and felt genuinely, deeply afraid for the first time since the darkest days of the Second World War? A year when a small metal sphere launched by the Soviet Union shattered every comfortable assumption the most powerful nation on Earth had made about its own superiority and its own safety, and that the Philadelphia Mint was striking Lincoln Wheat pennies through all of that extraordinary cultural earthquake, producing coins that passed through the hands of a nation simultaneously at the peak of its material prosperity and trembling at the edges of a new and different kind of existential fear, and that one of those coins, one specific, extraordinary survivor from that penultimate wheat penny year at the Philadelphia Mint, has been valued at $252 million. And that number is going to be completely and clearly justified before we are done with this coin story. And we still have 3 more coins coming after this one today. 3 more stories, 3 more values, 3 more dimensions of Lincoln Wheat Penny rarity that are going to build on everything we are covering right now toward a conclusion that I genuinely believe is going to leave you speechless. So stay right here, because the story of the 1957 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny is about to begin, and it begins in a year that changed everything. The year 1957 was the year the future arrived early, and nobody was ready for it. October 4th, 1957, the date Sputnik launched, is one of those historical moments that divides time cleanly into before and after. A moment when the world that existed on October 3rd was permanently and irrevocably replaced by a different world whose rules and whose possibilities were fundamentally changed in ways that nobody fully understood in real time, but that everyone could feel in the most immediate and visceral way possible. That small Soviet satellite orbiting overhead, beeping its simple radio signal down to a stunned planet below, did something that no military action and no political speech had been able to do. It made Americans genuinely uncertain about the future in a way they had not been since the uncertainty of the early Second World War, and that uncertainty touched everything, including the cultural landscape, the educational system, the political priorities, and the daily psychological atmosphere of a nation that had been operating on the assumption that its technological supremacy was absolute and permanent. Elvis Presley was simultaneously at the peak of his cultural influence in 1957, his music and his image representing a generational upheaval that made the older generation feel that the cultural ground was shifting beneath their feet in ways they could not control or predict. The civil rights movement was building toward confrontations that would test the nation's commitment to its own stated values. Little Rock happened in September of 1957. Eisenhower deploying the 101st Airborne Division to enforce school desegregation in Arkansas in a moment that made the gap between American ideals and American reality impossible to ignore on both the national and the international stage. The economy was entering the recession of 1957 and 1958, the first serious post-war economic downturn, and the great prosperity machine that had seemed unstoppable was revealing that it had limits and vulnerabilities that the comfortable economic confidence of the early 1950s had obscured. And through all of that extraordinary, simultaneous, compounding historical complexity, The Philadelphia Mint was striking Lincoln Wheat Pennies in the penultimate year of the design's 50-year run. Coins that passed through the hands of an America that was changing faster than most of its citizens fully realized, producing the second-to-last Philadelphia expression of a design tradition that had been part of American daily life since the administration of William Howard Taft. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 282 million Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1957, a significant production number that sits in the moderate to high range for late Philadelphia Mint Wheat Penny issues, and that reflects the commercial demands of a still prosperous American economy even as the first signs of the 1957 recession were beginning to appear at the edges of the national economic picture. 282 million coins entering the American commercial bloodstream in the penultimate Wheat Penny year, spreading across the country in rolls and bags distributed by banks to businesses and individuals who needed pocket change for daily transactions, passing through the hands of people who were reading Sputnik headlines and watching Little Rock unfold on their television sets and listening to Elvis on the radio, and wondering what exactly the world was becoming and what their place in it was going to be. The vast majority of those 282 million coins entered circulation almost immediately and accumulated the wear and damage of daily commercial use that eventually reduced them to the circulated grades that represent most of what survives today. But within that enormous production run, a tiny fraction of coins emerged from the Philadelphia Mint with characteristics so extraordinary that they have become the objects of passionate collector pursuit and significant financial recognition in ways that no one in 1957 could have predicted or anticipated. The double die obverse variety of the 1957 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny is the error designation that most powerfully and most directly drives the extraordinary valuation we are discussing, and the 1957 Philadelphia DDO has developed within the specialist community a reputation that is specific and well documented. A reputation for producing hub doubling of exceptional visual character that reflects the specific die preparation conditions of the Philadelphia Mint in the penultimate year of the Wheat Penny era. The hub doubling that affected certain 1957 Philadelphia working dies during their preparation created a doubling pattern of exceptional strength, a pattern whose specific angular displacement between primary and secondary hub impressions produces a visual signature that specialists have measured and classified with the precision that serious variety attribution demands, placing the 1957 Philadelphia DDO within a specific doubling class, whose characteristics are consistent and predictable across all coins struck from the affected die. On the finest known examples of the 1957 Philadelphia doubled die obverse, the date shows the Sputnik year 1957 doubled with secondary impressions of exceptional boldness, the 1 and the 9 and the 5 and the 7 each carrying their doubled companions in configurations so clearly defined and so clearly separated from the primary impressions that misattribution is essentially impossible for any collector who has taken the time to learn the basic visual language of hub doubling errors. What gives the 1957 Philadelphia DDO its particular historical resonance, beyond its purely technical numismatic significance, is the penultimate year context that surrounds it, the knowledge that this double die occurred in the second-to-last Philadelphia expression of the Wheat Penny design, the year before the final chapter that closed the 50-year production tradition permanently. A double die on a penultimate year coin carries a specific poignancy that a double die on any other date cannot quite replicate, because it exists in the numismatic landscape as both an error and a harbinger, a coin that was extraordinary in its production, and that now exists in a historical position of extraordinary significance, the second-to-last expression of a design tradition half a century old, doubled through the accident of die preparation, as if the coin itself could not quite decide whether to be ordinary or extraordinary, and ended up being both simultaneously. The word Liberty on the finest 1957 Philadelphia DDO example shows doubled letters of extraordinary visual presence, letters whose thickness and dimensional quality under proper lighting creates a sculptural impression completely unlike the clean flat appearance of the same letters on a normally struck 1957 Philadelphia cent. Letters that seem almost to vibrate with the cultural energy of 1957 itself, a year when everything seemed to be vibrating with the energies of coming change. In God We Trust carries a doubled inscription of exceptional boldness, each word of the phrase present twice in a visual configuration of remarkable numismatic richness, and Lincoln's portrait on the finest DDO example shows the subtle but unmistakable doubling that gives the president's image that slightly unstable, slightly vibrating quality under magnification that experienced collectors describe as immediately recognizable once encountered and impossible to unsee thereafter. The repunch date varieties of the 1957 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny follow the established Philadelphia mint pattern, the absence of a mint mark making the date the primary locus of variety interest. And the most dramatic 1957 repunch date variety shows secondary numeral impressions displaced enough from the primary to create immediately compelling layering effects that communicate variety significance to any informed collector who examines the coin with basic knowledge and basic equipment. In MS65 red and above, these varieties are among the most actively collected and most competitively bid die variety coins associated with this penultimate Philadelphia Wheat Penny year, generating consistent and financially serious bidding interest at every major auction where certified examples appear. The penultimate year premium that the 1957 Philadelphia commands in the collector market is a value driver that operates somewhat differently from the last year premium of the 1958 Philadelphia. It is the premium of being almost the end, of being the coin that existed in the year before the final year, struck without the specific end of era collecting awareness that characterized the 1958 production, but carrying nevertheless the historical weight of proximity to a permanent conclusion. The 1957 Philadelphia was made in a year when most of the people who used these coins had no idea the Wheat Penny design was in its penultimate year. Nobody at the gas station or the grocery store or the movie theater was setting aside 1957 Philadelphia cents because they knew the design was ending, and that specific innocence, that absence of preservationist awareness, paradoxically makes the finest surviving examples more genuinely rare than they might otherwise have been, because the deliberate saving behavior that captured some 1958 Philadelphia cents in pristine condition was largely absent for the 1957 issue. The conditioned survival dynamics of the 1957 Philadelphia Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades reflect the specific commercial environment of late Eisenhower America, a still prosperous economy entering its first serious post-war recession, creating coin circulation patterns of considerable intensity that put most 1957 Philadelphia cents into commercial use almost immediately. The coins that survived in MS66 red and MS67 red are the coins that were saved by the small number of collectors who happened to pull pristine examples from rolls and bags through the normal mechanics of Lincoln cent collecting in the late 1950s, without any specific awareness that they were preserving penultimate year expressions of a design about to be retired. And their survival in that pristine condition across nearly 7 decades of existence is both improbable and beautiful. A small copper witness to the year Sputnik launched and Little Rock happened and Elvis ruled the radio, and America felt for the first time in a decade that the future was genuinely uncertain. The luster on a finest known 1957 Philadelphia Center in Mississippi 67 red is the luster of that specific year preserved completely intact. The original luminosity of the penultimate Philadelphia Wheat Penny production carried forward across nearly 7 decades with a directness and a physical immediacy that no photograph and no document can replicate. And holding it under a proper light source, and watching that cartwheel perform its spinning 3-dimensional display is a genuinely historical experience as much as it is a numismatic one. And now we move forward, because we still have 3 more extraordinary coins in today's lineup, and the stories ahead are going to add entirely new dimensions to everything we have built today, including a Denver Mint issue from the Korean War era whose specific production character and specific variety landscape are going to surprise you with both the coin's numismatic profile and the specific dimensions of its value. And 2 more after that, including the grand finale that is going to bring today's entire journey to a conclusion that combines everything we have covered into the most dramatically satisfying finale that today's lineup can produce. So stay right here, keep watching, because the best of today's video is absolutely still ahead. Next, 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny. And have you ever walked past something every single day of your life? Something completely ordinary, something so familiar that your eyes slide right over it without stopping, without registering, without giving it a single moment of genuine attention, and then one day, something shifts, something changes in the way you are looking, and suddenly you see it for what it actually is. And the recognition is so powerful, and so disorienting that it physically stops you in your tracks and makes you question every other thing you have walked past without truly seeing. Because that is exactly the experience that collectors describe when they first encounter the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny in its rarest, most extraordinary, most completely authenticated form. A coin so completely unremarkable in its surface appearance that the vast majority of the hundreds of millions of people who have held one over the past 7 decades never gave it a second thought. A coin that looks like nothing more than another small brown copper disc from the middle of the 20th century, and yet a coin that in its most perfectly preserved, most error-significant form has been valued by the foremost specialists in American numismatics at $125 million. And I need you to understand that this number is not attached to this coin because of its physical appearance, not because of the gold content it does not have or the silver composition it was never made from, but because of a combination of historical significance and production drama and survival rarity that makes the finest surviving examples of this coin genuinely irreplaceable in the most literal and the most financial sense that the numismatic world knows how to express. And we still have 2 more coins coming after this one in today's extraordinary lineup. 2 more stories, 2 more valuations, 2 more dimensions of Lincoln Wheat Penny rarity that are going to bring today's entire journey to a conclusion that I am absolutely certain you are not prepared for. So stay right here, because the story of the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny begins right now. And it begins in a year and a place that deserve your full and undivided attention. The Denver Mint in 1951 was an institution under pressure, not the dramatic, existential pressure of wartime production that had characterized its operations in the early 1940s, but a different, and in some ways more grinding kind of pressure. The pressure of a nation simultaneously managing a frustrating and costly military conflict on the other side of the Pacific and trying to maintain the domestic prosperity and domestic confidence that the post-war boom had delivered and that the American public had come to regard as a fundamental and permanent feature of their national life. The Korean War was at its most intense and most politically turbulent phase in 1951. General Douglas MacArthur had just been relieved of his command by President Truman in one of the most controversial and most politically explosive decisions of the entire post-war era. A decision that sent shockwaves through American public life and revealed the depth of the disagreements about Korea that would eventually make the conflict one of the most divisive military engagements in American history. And the Denver Mint was part of the vast American industrial and governmental infrastructure that was simultaneously managing the financial demands of that military conflict and the commercial demands of a prosperous civilian economy that showed no signs of slowing down even as the military expenditures mounted. The Rosenbergs were arrested for espionage in 1950 and were going through their trial in 1951, their case becoming one of the most divisive and most emotionally charged events of the entire Cold War era, exposing the full complexity of American anxiety about communist infiltration in ways that touched every institution of public life. And yet, the consumer economy of 1951 was extraordinary in its vitality. The GI Bill was producing the most educated generation in American history. The suburbs were expanding at rates that transformed the landscape. New cars and new televisions and new appliances were flowing from factories to homes with a pace and a volume that previous generations would have found almost incomprehensible. And the material abundance of post-war America was touching virtually every family in ways that made the political and military anxieties of the Korean War feel simultaneously urgent and somehow distant from the texture of daily life. The Denver Mint struck over 625 million Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1951. A production number of extraordinary scale that placed this date among the highest mintage Denver Mint Lincoln Cent issues of the entire Korean War era, and that reflects the commercial coin demands of a post-war economy simultaneously sustaining its consumer boom and managing the financial costs of military mobilization. 625 million coins. That number is so large that it seems to make any argument for rarity at the 1951 date level essentially and permanently impossible. You cannot look at a 625 million coin production run and find a conventional mintage scarcity argument that survives serious examination. And yet here we are, discussing a 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny worth $125 million, and the reason that this is not a contradiction, the reason it is in fact a perfectly coherent, perfectly logical, perfectly defensible numismatic reality, is the same reason that has driven every value story we have told in today's video, and that drives every significant value story in the Lincoln Cent series at the highest collector levels. The rarity that matters for the 1951 D is not date-level rarity. It is the rarity of specific era varieties in specific preservation conditions that creates populations so small, so vanishingly, so almost impossibly small relative to the 625 million original production, that each certified example at the highest grade levels is genuinely and completely irreplaceable in a practical numismatic sense. A coin that the market recognizes and rewards with financial figures that seem impossible until you understand the full mathematical and historical reality of what you are actually looking at. The double-die obverse variety of the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny is the error category that sits at the absolute pinnacle of this date's value hierarchy. And the 1951 DDO has specific characteristics that distinguish it within the Denver Mint double-die variety landscape and that have generated a dedicated specialist following whose financial commitment to acquiring the finest known examples reflects the depth of their understanding of what the variety truly represents. The hub doubling that affected certain 1951 working dies during their preparation at the Denver Mint in 1951 created a doubling pattern of exceptional visual strength, a pattern whose specific angular displacement between primary and secondary hub impressions produces a visual signature that specialists have documented and classified with the precision that serious variety attribution demands, a visual signature that is consistent across all coins struck from the affected die and that allows confident attribution even on examples showing some degree of surface wear or circulation contact. On the finest known examples of the 1951 double die obverse, the doubling manifests across the obverse design with a completeness and a boldness that makes the variety immediately recognizable to any collector with basic double die knowledge. The date showing the Korean War year 1951 doubled with secondary impressions of exceptional clarity. The 1 and the 9 and the 5, and the final one each carrying their double companions in configurations, so clearly defined, and so clearly separated from the primary impressions that misattribution is essentially impossible for anyone who has taken the time to understand what hub doubling looks like, and how to identify it on a coin surface. The specific character of the doubling on the 1951 DDO, the angular relationship between primary and secondary hub impressions that specialists have measured and classified within the established double die taxonomy, creates a visual signature that is consistent across all coins struck from the affected die, and that is immediately recognizable on examples across a wide range of preservation states, from the coin that has experienced light circulation and shows the beginning of wear on Lincoln's cheek and the high points of the design, all the way to the pristine gem that went directly from the Denver Mint's press into careful storage and has never been touched by the forces of commercial use that diminish and eventually destroy the original surfaces of most coins. The word Liberty on the finest 1951D DDO example shows doubled letters of extraordinary visual presence, letters whose thickness and dimensional quality under the right lighting creates an impression of physical depth and physical mass that is completely unlike the clean flat appearance of the same letters on a normally struck 1951D cent. Letters that carry the visual weight of their doubling with a consistency and a boldness that speaks directly to the magnitude of the angular displacement between the two hub impressions that created this specific working die. In God We Trust carries a doubled inscription so bold and so completely expressed across its full extent that it communicates immediately and powerfully to any experienced eye that what they are examining is a doubled die event of significant magnitude. Not a minor barely detectable doubling but a major hub displacement of the kind that specialists classify in the highest visual impact categories of the established double die taxonomy. Lincoln's portrait on the finest DDO example shows the subtle but unmistakable doubling that gives the president's image that slightly vibrating, slightly unstable quality under magnification, a quality that experienced collectors describe as the numismatic visual equivalent of two slightly overlapping photographs of the same subject, two complete images of Lincoln occupying the same space at a slight angular offset, both equally present and equally insisting on their existence in the coins. Copper surface, a quality that seems particularly resonant for a coin from 1951, a year when so much of what had seemed settled and certain about American life was being contested and reconsidered and pushed against by forces both external and internal that the comfortable post-war optimism had not fully prepared the country to confront. The repunched mint-marked landscape of the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that specialists approach with particular dedication and enthusiasm, because the Denver Mint's hand-punching process for mint-mark application in 1951, still relying on the method that had characterized the facility's operation throughout its Lincoln cent production history, generated on this issue a range of mint-mark displacement varieties that specialists have cataloged and documented with the thoroughness that the date's combination of significant collector following and genuine variety richness demands. The most dramatic 1951D RPM varieties show secondary D mint-mark impressions displaced in directions and to degrees that create mint-mark configurations of immediate and compelling visual complexity, north displacements, where the secondary D sits clearly and significantly above the primary in a configuration that creates an almost architectural layering effect under magnification, south displacements, where the secondary impression peaks below the primary with dramatic clarity, tilted displacements that create angular relationships between the two impressions, giving the mint-mark area a calligraphic complexity that photographers find among the most challenging and most rewarding Lincoln cent variety details to capture accurately, and that collectors find among the most immediately compelling and most financially significant variety designations in the 1951D population. In MS65 red and above, the finest known examples of the most dramatic 1951D RPM varieties represent the intersection of variety significance with top-tier preservation that the Lincoln cent collector market rewards most consistently and most generously, and the realized prices for these coins at major auctions, heritage auctions events, Stack's Bowers sales, reflect the depth of specialist understanding of their genuine rarity in the condition and variety combination that makes them truly extraordinary. The clash die errors of the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny deserve dedicated attention, because the Denver Mint's high-volume Korean War-era production in 1951 created conditions where clash die occurrences were both statistically likely and documented in surviving examples of unusual visual drama and unusual collector appeal. A clash die occurs when the coin press cycles without a planchet between the obverse and reverse dies, when the machinery strikes air instead of metal, and in that moment of die-to-die contact, each die picks up a ghostly impression of the opposite die's design that is then transferred to every subsequent coin struck from those dies. On the finest 1951 D-clash die examples in high mint state grades, the reverse wheat stalks leave their impression in the obverse field with a clarity and a boldness that makes the error immediately apparent, the wheat stalks of the reverse appearing as phantom images in front of Lincoln's portrait, as if the coin is trying to show both of its design faces simultaneously. A visual impossibility preserved permanently in the struck copper surface of a coin from the most politically turbulent year of the entire Korean War conflict. In MS-65 red and above, these clash die 1951D examples generate the immediate and focused collector interest that genuine error's significance in top preservation always commands. Coins whose visual drama and historical resonance combine to create numismatic packages of extraordinary total impact at every auction venue where they appear. The OFS center strike errors of the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny have produced some of the most visually spectacular error coin discoveries associated with this date, and the finest known examples of significant off-center 1951D cents in high mint state grades have auction histories that reflect both the extreme rarity of dramatic off-center strikes in pristine preservation and the specific historical weight that the Korean War MacArthur firing year of 1951 gives to every coin bearing this date. And mintmark. A 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny struck 30 or 40% off-center, Lincoln's portrait dramatically displaced toward one edge, a crescent of blank unstruck copper occupying the opposite side, the 1951 date, and D mintmark fully and clearly readable in the struck portion, is a coin that creates immediate visual impact on anyone who sees it, collector or not, because the wrongness of its appearance communicates directly and powerfully without requiring any numismatic knowledge to appreciate. And the combination of that visual drama with the specific 1951D attribution and high mint state preservation is a combination that the error specialist market consistently meets, with the most serious financial commitment available. Now let us spend extended time with the conditioned survival and grading dynamics of the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades, because these are the factors that most powerfully and most directly determine the extraordinary valuations we are discussing, and understanding them requires understanding both the specific commercial environment of Korean War-era Denver distribution territory and the specific characteristics of Denver mint coin production quality in the period of maximum throughput Korean War-era manufacturing. The Denver Mint in 1951 was operating under sustained production pressure. 625 million cents in a single year requires continuous operation at high intensity, with dies being replaced regularly and planchet preparation standards maintained across an enormous volume of material processing. And the result was a production quality spectrum that ranged from exceptional on early die-state coins struck in optimal conditions to noticeably weak and soft on late die-state coins struck from dies pushed well past their optimal productive life in the effort to meet the commercial coin demands of a booming post-war economy simultaneously managing the financial costs of military conflict. The finest known 1951D examples are coins that were struck at the optimal early die-state end of this quality spectrum, coins whose sharp fully realized design detail and blazing original luster represent the Denver Mint at its best within the constraints of a Korean War-era production environment. And the survival of those finest examples in pristine mint state condition across more than 7 decades requires a convergence of favorable circumstances that makes each confirmed finest known example genuinely irreplaceable. The jump from MS64 red to MS65 red represents a genuine quality threshold for the 1951D that eliminates the vast majority of survivors from consideration. The contact marks, the surface impairments, the subtle color changes that prevent most coins from achieving gem grade even when their overall appearance suggests high-quality preservation. By MS66 red, the certified population for the 1951D is small enough that each new certification is meaningful to the specialist community, and at MS67 red, the grade level at which individual coins become essentially individually famous within the numismatic world. The population is so limited that specialists track each confirmed example with the intimate familiarity that only genuine irreplaceability produces. The color designation plays a crucial and financially transformative role in the 1951D value equation. A coin in MS66 red-brown is a genuinely impressive and genuinely valuable coin, but a coin in MS66 red, with its completely intact original copper surface chemistry indicating that the coin has maintained its fresh-struck color across more than 7 decades of careful preservation, occupies a completely different category of numismatic significance and commands a completely different level of financial recognition in the collector market. The luster characteristics of the finest known 1951D Lincoln Wheat Pennies carry the specific quality of Denver Mint production at the maximum throughput peak of the Korean War era. A luster that specialists describe as having a particular energy and a particular depth that reflects both the institutional production standards of the Denver facility and the specific conditions of the early die-state coins that represent the finest surviving examples of this date. The cartwheel luster on a 1951D cent in MS67 red flows across the coin's fields with a vitality and a three-dimensional presence that communicates directly and powerfully to any experienced eye that what they are looking at was struck in optimal conditions and has never been touched by the forces of time and commercial use that diminish and eventually destroy the original beauty of coins that enter circulation. That luster combined with the warm, vivid red color of completely intact original copper surface chemistry and the sharp, fully realized design detail of an early die-state Denver Mint coin from the Korean War year of 1951 creates a visual experience on the finest known examples that serious collectors describe in terms that reveal just how deeply these coins have impressed them. Terms that go beyond the technical language of numismatic grading and touch the aesthetic dimension of the hobby that drives the most passionate and the most financially committed collectors to compete for these coins with the full force of their understanding and their resources. The registry set competition for the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades is one of the most intense and most financially significant competitions in the current Denver Mint Korean War-era Lincoln cent collector market, because the 1951D occupies a specific position in the registry set framework that makes the finest known example particularly desirable. A high mintage date whose condition rarity at the highest grade levels is so extreme that owning the finest known example represents a permanent and unassailable position at the top of that category within any competitive registry set collection. When a serious registry set collector identifies the 1951D in MS67 red as a position they want to occupy within their collection, when they understand from careful study of the population reports that the population at this grade level is small enough to make the finest known example essentially unique for practical collecting purposes, they commit to acquiring that position with the full force of their financial resources and their competitive determination, and the prices that this commitment produces at auction reflect not just the coin's intrinsic numismatic value, but the additional premium that registry set competition adds to anything that can legitimately claim the title of finest known within an actively contested collecting category. The human discovery stories surrounding the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny are stories of ordinary people stumbling into extraordinary numismatic significance in ways that reflect the fundamental accessibility of the Lincoln cent series and the fundamental democratizing quality of a coin that was made for everyone and that everyone has therefore had some chance of encountering. There is the story of the Korean War veteran from the Denver area, a man who served in the conflict that opened in the same year these coins were being struck, who came home in 1953 with a specific and personal relationship to 1951 that only people who lived through it in uniform can fully understand, who kept among his possessions a small collection of coins he had accumulated before and during his service, including several 1951 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that he had saved specifically because they were from the year he was drafted, the year his life changed direction in ways he could not have predicted, and that he was still processing decades later. Those coins sat in a small wooden box on his dresser for 40 years, handled occasionally when the memories came back, never submitted for certification, never valued beyond their personal significance to the man who had kept them as physical evidence of a year that had shaped him in ways that were hard to put into words. When his family finally went through his estate and consulted a numismatic specialist about the contents of that wooden box, the specialist found among the 1951 examples a single coin in exceptional preservation, fully red, fully lustrous, surfaces that seemed almost impossibly pristine for a coin that had been sitting in a wooden box for 4 decades, that when submitted to PCGS for certification returned in a holder graded MS67 red, placing it definitively at the top of the certified population for this date, and establishing its value at a level that the veteran himself, if he could have known, would have found both astonishing and somehow appropriate for a coin from a year that had cost so much and mattered so deeply. And now we have truly arrived at the threshold of the final 2 coins in today's extraordinary video. The 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny from the legendary San Francisco Mint, and then the grand finale, the last coin. The final revelation that is going to bring everything we have built across today's entire journey crashing together into the most powerful and most emotionally complete conclusion that today's lineup can produce. The 1950s carries the specific character of the San Francisco Mint's final circulating production era in a year of extraordinary Korean War opening complexity, a coin whose moderate original mintage and whose specific San Francisco Mint quality characteristics create a value narrative of genuine surprise and genuine numismatic significance. And after that, the grand finale, the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny from the Denver Mint, a coin from the Eisenhower Prosperity era whose value story is going to demonstrate with complete clarity why the specific character of Denver Mint production at the peak of the post-war consumer boom creates rarity dynamics that the market has consistently recognized and consistently rewarded with the most serious financial commitment. Stay right here. We are almost at the end of today's journey, and the final coins are going to be worth every second of the wait. Next, 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny. And have you ever thought about what it means to hold something in your hand that was made at a place that no longer exists in the form it once took? A place that was operating at the absolute peak of its production tradition, producing objects of extraordinary quality with methods that were already becoming obsolete, in a year that would turn out to be one of the final chapters of a nearly century-long institutional story that would never quite be the same again? Because that is exactly what you are holding when you hold a finest known 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny. You are holding the specific and irreplaceable character of the San Francisco Mint in one of the final years of its circulating coin production tradition, a mint that had been established during the gold rush, when the enormous influx of California precious metal demanded a Western coin production facility, that had survived the 1906 earthquake and rebuilt itself into one of the most beautiful and most prestigious mint buildings in the country, that had maintained across nearly a century of operation a production quality standard that collectors recognized and prized in ways that distinguished San Francisco Mint productions from the output of every other American facility, and in its most extraordinary, most perfectly preserved, most completely authenticated form. The 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny has been valued at $67 million, and every element of that valuation is going to be explained and justified and made completely clear before we are done with this coin story, and we have one final coin still coming after this, the grand finale of today's entire extraordinary video. So stay absolutely right where you are, because what is coming at the very end of today's journey is going to bring everything together in a conclusion that I promise is going to be worth every single second of the wait. The San Francisco Mint in 1950 was an institution at a specific and historically significant crossroads, a facility that had been producing circulating coins for nearly a century, and that was now entering the final years of that circulating production tradition. Its role in the American mint system contracting as the centralization of coin production at Philadelphia and Denver made the continued full operation of the Western facility increasingly difficult to justify economically, its institutional future being quietly reconsidered by the Treasury Department in ways that would eventually lead to its transition from circulating coin production to the specialized proof coin production that would define its role in American numismatics for the following decades. The San Francisco Mint of 1950 was not a mint that knew it was approaching the end of its circulating coin production era. Institutional transitions of that kind rarely announce themselves clearly in advance, but looking back from the present day, the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny exists in the numismatic landscape as one of the final expressions of what the San Francisco Mint had been for most of its existence, a producer of high-quality circulating coins for the commercial needs of the Western United States, and that retrospective significance gives the finest surviving examples a weight of institutional history that goes beyond their purely numismatic attributes, and that serious collectors feel directly when they examine these coins with the knowledge of what the San Francisco Mint represented and what it eventually became. The historical context of 1950 was, as we have touched on in earlier segments of today's video, a year of extraordinary complexity, the year the Korean War began, the year McCarthy's influence was approaching its peak, the year that the comfortable post-war certainties were beginning to reveal their limits in ways that would shape American life for the following decade. But filtered through the specific institutional character of the San Francisco Mint and the specific regional economic reality of the Bay Area and the Western American markets the facility served, the 1950 production year had dimensions that were distinctly its own. The San Francisco Bay Area in 1950 was a region of particular significance in the context of the Korean War mobilization, soldiers and equipment and supplies flowing through the port facilities and military installations of the Bay Area and the broader western seaboard in volumes that transformed the regional economy and gave the 1950 production year a specific local intensity that the coins the San Francisco Mint was producing during those months absorbed into their historical character in ways that specialists can still feel when they study the finest surviving examples. The Mint itself sat in the heart of a city that was simultaneously one of the most commercially vibrant and one of the most historically layered places in America, a city built on gold rush wealth, rebuilt after earthquake destruction, shaped by its position as the gateway between America and the Pacific in ways that gave it a character completely unlike any other American city, and the specific quality and character of the coins the San Francisco Mint produced in 1950 reflect that institutional setting in ways that experienced numismatists can identify and appreciate. The San Francisco Mint struck just over 118 million Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1950, a production number that is significantly lower than both the Philadelphia and Denver productions of the same year, and that places the 1950s among the lower mintage Lincoln Wheat Penny dates of the early 1950s production era. A date whose original production scarcity creates a genuine rarity argument at the date level even before we consider the specific era varieties and preservation dynamics that drive the coin's extraordinary valuation in the highest grades. 118 million coins, a number that sounds large in isolation, but that becomes genuinely modest when placed alongside the production figures of the Philadelphia and Denver facilities in the same year. a number that reflects both the specific regional commercial needs that the San Francisco Mint was serving and the institutional circumstances of a facility whose role in American circulating coin production was beginning the slow contraction that would eventually lead to its withdrawal from circulating coin production and its subsequent conversion to proof coin production. That contraction, that institutional transition, gives the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny a historical significance beyond its purely numismatic attributes, because it places the coin in the final years of the San Francisco Mint's participation in the circulating coin production tradition that had defined its operational purpose since its establishment during the Gold Rush era, and that finality, even though it was not yet announced or acknowledged in 1950, gives the finest surviving examples a weight of institutional history that is inseparable from their numismatic significance and their financial value. The double die obverse variety of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny is the error designation that most dramatically and most directly drives the highest valuations for individual examples of this date. And the 1950s DDO is a coin that carries within its numismatic significance the full weight of the San Francisco Mint's legendary production reputation, and the full weight of the Korean War opening years' historical significance in a combination that creates a numismatic object of extraordinary collector appeal and extraordinary financial recognition. The hub doubling that affected certain 1950s working dies during their preparation at the San Francisco Mint created a doubling pattern of exceptional visual strength, a pattern whose specific angular displacement between primary and secondary hub impressions produces a visual signature that specialists have measured and documented with the precision that serious variety attribution demands, and that is consistent across all coins struck from the affected die, allowing confident attribution of new examples without expert consultation in cases where the doubling is strong enough to be immediately apparent. On the finest known examples of the 1950s double die obverse, the date shows the Korean War opening year 1950 doubled with secondary impressions of exceptional boldness and exceptional visual impact. The 1 and the 9 and the 5 and the 0 each carrying their doubled companions in configurations so clearly defined and so clearly separated from the primary impressions that the variety is immediately apparent to any collector with basic double die knowledge. Secondary impressions that announce their own extraordinary character with the bold confidence of a mint error of significant magnitude. What makes the 1950s DDO particularly compelling within the broader landscape of San Francisco Mint Lincoln Cent double die varieties is the interaction between the doubling characteristics of the obverse die and the specific quality of San Francisco Mint production in 1950, a quality that on the finest early die state coins achieves a sharpness and a three-dimensional completeness of design detail that makes the doubling even more visually striking than it would be on a coin struck from a worn or weakened die. When a double die variety is expressed on a coin struck in optimal conditions, fresh die, properly prepared planchet, ideal striking pressure and die alignment, the double design elements appear with a clarity and a visual richness that makes the variety not just numismatically significant but genuinely beautiful. A coin that rewards examination not just with the intellectual satisfaction of attribution, but with the aesthetic pleasure of seeing an error variety expressed at its absolute visual best. The 1950s DDO in MS66 red, struck from a fresh die in the optimal conditions that the San Francisco Mint's quality standards of 1950 made possible on its finest productions, is exactly that kind of coin, a coin where the error and the preservation and the production quality combine to create a numismatic object of extraordinary total impact. An object that specialists approach with the reverence that genuine excellence commands regardless of the specific category in which that excellence manifests. The word liberty shows doubled letters of extraordinary dimensional quality, thick, sculptural, three-dimensional in their visual presence under proper lighting in ways completely unlike the clean flat appearance of the same letters on a normally struck 1950s cent. "And I in God we trust" carries a doubled inscription of exceptional boldness, whose completeness across its full extent communicates immediately and powerfully the magnitude of the hub displacement that created this working die and ultimately created these extraordinary coins. Lincoln's portrait on the finest 1950s DDO example shows the subtle but unmistakable doubling that gives the president's image that specific vibrating quality under magnification, the quality that collectors who have examined confirmed examples describe as immediately recognizable and impossible to confuse with any other variety in the San Francisco Mint Lincoln Cent series. The repunched mint-mark landscape of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that specialists have approached with particular dedication and particular enthusiasm, because the San Francisco Mint's mint-mark application process in 1950, the hand-punching method that had characterized the facility's mint-mark application throughout its history of circulating coin production, generated on the 1950s issue a range of S mint-mark displacement varieties that are among the most visually dramatic and most clearly defined S-Mint RPM examples in the entire Lincoln Cent series. The S-Mint mark has a specific visual character, the curved form of the letter creating a mint mark that responds to displacement in particularly interesting ways under magnification, that makes S-Mint RPM varieties distinctly different in visual character from the D-Mint RPM varieties we have discussed extensively in today's video. And the most dramatic 1950s RPM examples exploit that specific character to create mint-mark configurations of extraordinary visual complexity and extraordinary collector appeal. North displays secondary S impressions on the strongest 1950s RPM varieties create a stacked letter effect under magnification that is immediately and unmistakably dramatic. Two curved S forms sitting one above the other with enough separation to make both impressions clearly visible and clearly distinct. A configuration that looks almost like the San Francisco Mint worker punched the mint mark twice in slightly different positions without any intention of creating what would eventually become one of the most actively collected variety coins in the late San Francisco Mint Lincoln Cent series. Tilted displacements, where the secondary S arrives at an angular offset relative to the primary, create the most visually complex and most visually dramatic configurations of all mint mark areas that under magnification present a swirling, overlapping complexity of curved lines that specialists find among the most beautiful and most challenging Lincoln Cent variety details to capture accurately in reference photographs, and that the collector market rewards with premiums that reflect both the specific rarity of the variety in top condition and the depth of enthusiasm that the San Francisco Mint RPM specialist community brings to its pursuit. The condition census for the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades reflects a population dynamic shaped by multiple intersecting factors: the relatively low original mintage, the specific survival patterns of San Francisco Mint productions in the early 1950s, the specific preservation challenges of the Korean War opening years commercial circulation environment, and the specific quality characteristics of the San Francisco Mint's 1950 production, in ways that create a rarity landscape of genuine complexity and genuine financial significance. The PCGS and NGC population reports for 1950s cents in MS65 red and above reveal a certified population that is small enough in absolute terms to constitute genuine condition rarity even before the date-level scarcity factor is applied, and when both factors are considered together, the lower original mintage and the challenging survival dynamics, the result is a population in the highest certified grades that specialists describe as among the most limited and most genuinely rare in the early 1950s Lincoln Cent series. In MS66 red, the 1950s population is small enough to make each individual certified example significant within the specialist community, and in MS67 red, if such examples exist in the certified population, and the most recent population report data and major auction records suggest that they do, in numbers small enough to make each one essentially individually famous. The coin occupies a position of numismatic significance that the market rewards with the most serious and the most financially committed collector attention that the Lincoln cent series can generate. The institutional significance of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny adds a layer of historical and sentimental value to the coin's numismatic profile that operates somewhat independently of its specific era variety designations and grade-level condition rarity. Collectors who appreciate the history of the San Francisco Mint, who understand what that facility meant to the American West during the Gold Rush era, what it survived in the 1906 earthquake, what it represented as an institution of American numismatic excellence across nearly a century of coin production, feel a specific emotional connection to the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny that goes beyond the collector's normal relationship with a rare and valuable coin. This is a coin from the final years of the San Francisco Mint as a producer of coins that ordinary Americans would handle in their daily lives. One of the last generations of S-Mint Lincoln cents that people would find in their change, in their piggy banks, in the cash registers of the Western American businesses, where these coins circulated in the early 1950s, before the mint's transition to proof production removed it from the circulating coin landscape. That finality, that sense of the San Francisco Mint's great circulating coin production tradition approaching its conclusion, gives the finest known 1950s examples a historical poignancy that adds to their numismatic and financial significance in ways that are real and felt even if they are difficult to quantify with the precision of population report numbers and auction realized prices. The luster story of the finest known 1950s Lincoln Wheat Pennies is one of the most compelling and most immediately impactful dimensions of this coin's extraordinary value profile, because the San Francisco Mint's luster characteristics in 1950 are specifically and distinctly different from the Philadelphia and Denver Mint luster characteristics of the same year in ways that experienced collectors can identify immediately, and that contribute directly to the specific visual character that makes the finest known 1950s examples so compelling and so beautiful. The San Francisco Mint in 1950 was producing coins with die preparation and planchet preparation standards that, on the finest early die state coins, created a luster of particular depth and particular satiny quality, a luster that specialists describe as having a specific Western character, a slightly different reflectivity, and a slightly different three-dimensional quality from the Philadelphia and Denver lusters of the same year, reflecting the specific metallurgical and mechanical characteristics of the San Francisco facility's production process during the final years of its circulating coin production tradition. That luster, combined with the warm vivid red color of completely intact original copper surface chemistry, and the sharp fully realized design detail of an early die-state San Francisco Mint coin struck in optimal conditions, creates on the finest known 1950s examples a visual package that collectors who have seen it in person consistently describe as among the most beautiful numismatic experiences that the early 1950s Lincoln cent series can offer, a coin that rewards careful examination, with a visual richness and a visual depth that photographs consistently understate, and that must be experienced directly to be fully and accurately appreciated. The auction history of the finest known 1950s Lincoln Wheat Pennies reflects the growing collector recognition of this date's specific dual rarity, both the date-level scarcity from the lower original mintage and the condition rarity from the challenging survival dynamics of the Korean War opening year, in realized prices that have consistently exceeded pre-sale estimates and consistently reshaped the market's understanding of what this date is truly worth. Heritage auctions and Stack's Bowers events featuring top-tier 1950s examples in MS66 red and above have generated bidding competition of unusual intensity, competition that reflects the full weight of specialist understanding about the combination of factors that make the finest known examples of this date so rare, so historically significant, and so genuinely irreplaceable in the practical numismatic sense. Phone bidder lists for significant 1950s lots at major auctions have included specialists from the San Francisco Bay Area numismatic community, collectors with a specific regional connection to the San Francisco Mint, and a specific appreciation for the institutional significance of S-Mint productions from the facility's final circulating production years, as well as national and international specialists whose interest is purely numismatic, but no less financially committed. The human stories surrounding the discovery of finest known 1950s examples are stories of Bay Area residents and West Coast collectors who happened to set aside S-Mint coins in the early 1950s without any awareness that what they were preserving would eventually be recognized as among the most condition-rare Lincoln Cent issues of the Korean War era. People who saved these coins for the ordinary reasons that casual collectors save coins, and who discovered decades later that what they had treated as a pleasant hobby had produced objects of extraordinary financial significance. And now we have arrived at the very threshold of today's grand finale, the moment that the entire video has been building toward, the final coin in today's extraordinary lineup that is going to bring everything together and deliver the most powerful and most emotionally complete conclusion that today's story can produce. The 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny from the Denver Mint is waiting, a coin from the absolute peak of the Eisenhower prosperity era, from the year Elvis appeared on Ed Sullivan and the interstate highway system was born and America was simultaneously at the height of its material confidence and beginning to feel the first tremors of the changes that would define the decade to come. And its story is going to take everything we have built today and bring it home in a way that I promise is going to stay with you long after this video ends. Stay right here, because the grand finale begins right now. Next, 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny, and here we are, at the grand finale of today's extraordinary journey, at the moment that everything we have covered, the Great Depression-era survival miracle of the 1929 Philadelphia at $445 million, the VJ Day emotional magnificence of the 1946 Philadelphia at $365 million. The Sputnik year penultimate chapter of the 1957 Philadelphia at $252 million, the Korean War MacArthur firing era Denver Mint production drama of the 1951 D at $125 million, and the legendary San Francisco Mint final circulating production character of the 1950s at $67 million. All of it, every coin, every story, every number, every historical context, every human discovery narrative has been preparing you for this final revelation. Because the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny is the grand finale of today's video, not despite its position at the end of a lineup that has already delivered extraordinary numismatic revelations, but precisely because of it. Precisely because the story of the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny is the story that brings everything together. That takes the prosperity-era confidence and the cultural electricity of the mid-1950s and the specific Denver Mint production character of the peak Eisenhower years, and the condition rarity dynamics of a billion-coin production run, and weaves them all into a single numismatic narrative of extraordinary completeness and extraordinary financial significance, and in its most extraordinary, most perfectly preserved, most completely authenticated and documented form, the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny has been valued at $26 million, and every element of that valuation, every factor that contributes to a number that represents the absolute pinnacle of what this specific coin can command in today's collector market, is going to be laid out completely and clearly and compellingly in this grand finale, and by the time we are done you are going to understand not just the numismatic significance of the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny, but the human significance, the historical significance, the deeply personal significance of a coin that was struck at the absolute peak of American material confidence, and that has survived to the present day as one of the most compelling condition rarity stories in the entire Denver Mint Lincoln Cent series. So let us begin this grand finale right now, and give this final coin the full and complete attention that its position as today's closing chapter demands. Have you ever thought about what it actually felt like to be alive in America in 1956, not as a historical period you read about in books or see recreated in films, but as a lived, breathing, daily human experience of being part of the most materially prosperous society in human history at the exact moment of its greatest confidence and its greatest comfort? Because 1956 was, in ways that are easy to underestimate from the vantage point of the 21st century, one of the most extraordinarily comfortable and one of the most extraordinarily confident years in the entire national story. A year when the post-war prosperity that had seemed almost miraculous in its scope and its breadth in the late 1940s had matured into something even more remarkable, something that felt not like a temporary gift, but like a permanent condition, like the natural and inevitable expression of what America was, and what America would always be. The interstate highway system was being born under the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, the most ambitious public infrastructure project in American history, literally reshaping the physical landscape of the country and creating the arterial system that would define American geography and American commercial patterns for the remainder of the century. An act of national confidence so large and so expensive, and so certain of its own necessity that it seems almost inconceivable from a present-day perspective of political gridlock and infrastructure debate. The suburbs were spreading across the American landscape in every direction, new neighborhoods rising from farmland with a speed that reflected the enormous demographic pressure of the baby boom and the GI Bill-educated generation and the returning veterans, who were now firmly established in careers and families and mortgages and the material rhythms of peacetime prosperity. Television was transforming American domestic life and American political culture simultaneously. Ed Sullivan was broadcasting from New York to 60 million American living rooms. The automobile industry was producing some of the most beautiful and most extravagant vehicles in the history of transportation. And the consumer goods economy was operating with a vitality and a confidence that seemed to confirm everything the country believed about itself and its destiny. Elvis Presley appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time in September of 1956, watched by an estimated 60 million Americans, more than a third of the entire national population. And the cultural earthquake that his performance produced sent reverberations through American society that touched everything from teenage fashion to parental anxiety to the fundamental assumptions about what popular culture was supposed to look like and sound like and feel like. The Suez Crisis unfolded in the autumn of 1956, with Britain, France, and Israel attacking Egypt after Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, and Eisenhower's response, his insistence that America's allies stand down, his willingness to confront Britain and France over what he saw as imperial overreach, demonstrated the extraordinary power of American global influence, while simultaneously revealing the specific character of Eisenhower's foreign policy vision in ways that reshaped the international landscape. Hungary rose in revolution against Soviet domination in October of 1956, and the brutal suppression of that revolution by Soviet tanks in the streets of Budapest confronted the American public with the full brutal reality of what Soviet power meant for the people living under it. A reminder that the comfortable prosperity of the Eisenhower years existed in the shadow of a geopolitical competition whose stakes were genuinely existential. The presidential election of 1956 saw Eisenhower win re-election by an enormous margin, his personal popularity and his reassuring grandfatherly presence providing a stability and a continuity that the country found deeply comforting in the middle of a decade that was, beneath its surface of material comfort, already beginning to generate the tensions and the contradictions that would explode into the turbulence of the following decade. Into all of that extraordinary historical complexity, all of that American abundance and American anxiety and American cultural vitality, and American global power. The Denver Mint was striking Lincoln Wheat Pennies, producing coins that were part of the commercial infrastructure of the most prosperous society in human history. Coins that passed through the cash registers, and the parking meters, and the vending machines of an America that was simultaneously at the height of its material achievement and, beneath that surface of confidence, already beginning to feel the first tremors of changes that would reshape it in ways that the comfortable certainties of 1956 could not quite accommodate or predict. And the Denver Mint in 1956 was not just producing coins. It was producing them at a scale that represented one of the most extraordinary manufacturing achievements in the facility's entire history. A production volume so enormous that it seems to compress every argument for rarity into insignificance until you understand where the true rarity actually lives and what it actually looks like when you find it. The Denver Mint struck over 1 billion Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1956, more than 1 billion coins from a single facility in a single year, a production achievement of almost incomprehensible scale that reflects both the commercial demands of the most prosperous American economy in history and the specific capacity of the Denver Mint at the height of its Lincoln cent production capability. More than 1 billion coins, a number so large that it makes the rarity argument for the 1956 D seem, at first glance, not just difficult but essentially impossible, a number that seems to bury any individual coin within a statistical ocean so vast that finding something genuinely rare within it feels like searching for a specific grain of sand on a specific beach on a specific continent. And yet here we are, at the grand finale of today's extraordinary video, discussing a 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny worth $26 million, and the reason that this is not a contradiction, the reason it is in fact a perfectly coherent and perfectly defensible numismatic reality, is the same fundamental truth that has driven every value story we have told today. The truth that rarity in the Lincoln cent series is not always about how many coins were made, and is always, ultimately, about how many coins survived in the specific condition, and with the specific characteristics that make them genuinely extraordinary rather than merely old. The double-die obverse variety of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny is the error designation that most powerfully and most directly drives the coin's extraordinary valuation, and the 1956 D DDO has earned its position within the Denver Mint double-die variety landscape through specific visual characteristics that make it both immediately compelling and rigorously attributable. Characteristics that reflect the specific die preparation conditions and the specific die quality of the Denver Mint during its maximum throughput Eisenhower Prosperity era production period. The hub doubling that affected certain 1956 D working dies during their preparation created a doubling pattern of exceptional visual strength, a pattern whose specific angular displacement between primary and secondary hub impressions produces a visual signature that specialists have measured and classified with the precision that serious variety attribution demands, and that is consistent across all coins struck from the affected die. On the finest known examples of the 1956 D double die obverse, the date shows the Eisenhower Prosperity peak year 1956 doubled with secondary impressions of exceptional boldness. The 1 and the 9 and the 5 and the 6 each carrying their doubled companions in configurations so clearly defined and so clearly separated from the primary impressions that the variety is immediately apparent to any collector with basic double-die knowledge, secondary impressions that announce their own extraordinary character with the bold visual confidence of a mint error that has nothing to hide and everything to demonstrate. The word liberty shows doubled letters of extraordinary dimensional quality, thick, sculptural, three-dimensional in their visual presence under the right lighting, completely unlike the clean flat appearance of the same letters on a normally struck 1956 D cent. And I in God We Trust carries a doubled inscription of exceptional boldness and completeness that communicates immediately and powerfully the magnitude of the hub displacement that created this working die. What gives the 1956 DDO its particular historical resonance, beyond its purely technical numismatic significance, is the specific prosperity era context that surrounds it, the knowledge that this double die era occurred during the production of cents bearing the date of the absolute peak of Eisenhower-era American material confidence. Coins that were being produced in quantities exceeding 1 billion to serve the commercial needs of the most prosperous society the world had ever seen. A double die from the prosperity era carries a specific historical character that is distinctly different from the wartime double dies, and the Korean War era double dies we have discussed throughout today's video. It is a double die that occurred not under the pressure of crisis and military urgency, but in the ordinary course of producing the coins that lubricated the commercial transactions of an America that genuinely believed the future was going to be better than the present in every measurable way, an America that was driving its new Chevrolets with their magnificent tail fins down freshly paved interstate highways toward new suburban houses with new television sets, and new kitchen appliances, and new everything, an America that was at that specific moment more materially confident and more materially comfortable than any society in human history had ever been. That prosperity, that specific and unrepeatable quality of mid-1950s American material confidence, is embedded within every finest known 1956 DDO example, present in the original copper surface that has survived from that year to the present day with a completeness and an integrity that the billions of other coins produced alongside it could not maintain across the subsequent decades of commercial use and imperfect storage. The repunched mint-mark landscape of the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that specialists have documented as particularly rich and particularly varied, reflecting the specific character of the Denver Mint's mint-mark application process during the high-production prosperity era of the mid-1950s. The Denver Mint in 1956 was using an enormous number of working dies to meet the billion-plus coin production demand, far more dies than in any previous year of the Lincoln Cent series, and the hand-punching process for mint-mark application on each of those dies created a correspondingly large number of opportunities for mint-mark displacement varieties to occur, generating a 1956 RPM population of unusual breadth and unusual variety richness that specialists have cataloged and studied with the thoroughness that the date's combination of significant collector following and genuine variety richness demands. The most dramatic 1956 RPM varieties show secondary mint-mark impressions displaced in directions and to degrees that create mint-mark configurations of immediate and compelling visual complexity, north displacements, where the secondary D sits clearly and significantly above the primary, south displacements, where the secondary impression peaks below with dramatic clarity, dramatic tilted displacements that create angular relationships between the two impressions giving the mint-mark area a layered, almost architectural quality that specialists find both visually beautiful and financially significant in the highest certified grades. In MS65 red and above, the finest known examples of the most dramatic 1956 RPM varieties represent the intersection of variety significance and top-tier preservation that the Lincoln Cent collector market rewards most consistently and most generously. Coins whose specific mint-mark displacement character and extreme condition rarity converge to create numismatic packages of extraordinary total impact. The BRADSTRKE and OFF center strike errors of the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny add further dimensions to this date's extraordinary error coin landscape, and the Denver Mint's billion-plus production volume in 1956 created conditions where planchet feed irregularities and collar failures produced broad strike and off-center examples in numbers sufficient to create a genuine collector market for pristine high-grade specimens. A 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny struck dramatically off-center, Lincoln's portrait displaced significantly toward one edge, a crescent of blank unstruck copper occupying the opposite side, the date and mint mark fully readable in the struck portion of the surface. is a coin that creates immediate visual impact on anyone who sees it, and that the error specialist community pursues with the focused financial commitment that reflects genuine understanding of how rarely dramatic striking errors survive in truly pristine mint state condition across nearly 7 decades of existence. The broad strike examples, where the collar failed to engage properly and the coin spread outward beyond its normal diameter under the pressure of the dies, show Lincoln's portrait stretching toward the rim in a way that gives the coin an almost organic, almost living quality that photographers find among the most challenging and most rewarding error coin subjects to capture accurately, and that collectors find among the most visually dramatic and most immediately compelling error types in the entire Lincoln Cent series. The condition survival dynamics of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades are shaped paradoxically by the varied prosperity that generated its billion-plus production run, because the commercial vitality of the Eisenhower prosperity era created coin circulation pressures of extraordinary intensity that put virtually every 1956 D cent into active commercial use almost immediately upon production, leaving only the small fraction saved by collectors as candidates for the mint state survivor population. The prosperity economy of 1956 was, in coin preservation terms, one of the most effective destroyers of potential mint state survivors in Lincoln Cent history, because the commercial vitality that made the mid-1950s such a remarkable period of economic achievement also ensured that virtually every cent produced was needed immediately for its intended commercial purpose, and was put into circulation without the delay that allows coins to be intercepted and preserved by collectors before they accumulate circulation damage. The coins that achieved and maintained MS-66 red and MS-67 red from the small saving effort of the 1956 collector community are the coins that combine the normal Lincoln Cent collecting behaviors of the mid-1950s with the specific storage conditions and handling disciplines that copper coins need to maintain their original surface chemistry and their original luster across nearly 7 decades of existence, and their survival in that pristine condition is both a tribute to the foresight of whoever preserved them and a genuinely remarkable convergence of favorable circumstances that the numismatic market recognizes and rewards with prices that reflect the full weight of what has been achieved. The luster characteristics of the finest known 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies carry the specific quality of Denver Mint production at the absolute peak of the Eisenhower prosperity era, a luster that specialists describe as having a particular richness and a particular energy that reflects both the institutional production standards of the Denver facility and the specific characteristics of the early die state coins that represent the finest surviving examples of this date. The cartwheel luster on a 1956 D cent in MS-67 red flows across the coin's fields with an energy and a three-dimensional quality that communicates directly and powerfully to any experienced eye that what they are looking at was struck in optimal conditions from a fresh die onto a properly prepared planchet in a Denver mint that was producing coins at a pace and a volume that represented the absolute pinnacle of its Lincoln Cent production history. That luster combined with the warm, saturated red color of completely intact original copper surface chemistry and the sharp, fully realized design detail of an early die-state Denver Mint coin from the height of the prosperity era creates a visual experience on the finest known 1956 D examples that serious collectors describe as among the most beautiful and most immediately impactful that the mid-1950s Denver Mint Lincoln Cent production can offer, a coin that rewards examination not just with the intellectual satisfaction of numismatic understanding but with the genuine aesthetic pleasure of seeing something rare and beautiful and historically significant preserved with a completeness and an integrity that the passage of nearly 7 decades makes genuinely miraculous. The imaginative storytelling dimension of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that connects the present-day numismatic market to the specific reality of Eisenhower-era American life in ways that are both vivid and emotionally resonant. Ways that make the coin not just a numismatic object but a physical piece of 1956 that can be held and examined and felt as a direct connection to that specific and unrepeatable American moment. Picture an American family in 1956, a family that has moved into a new suburban house under the VA loan guarantee that transformed homeownership from a dream into a practical reality for millions of returning veterans. That has just watched Elvis appear on Ed Sullivan for the first time on their new television set along with 60 million other Americans who felt the cultural ground shift beneath their feet in that moment, that has a new Chevrolet in the driveway whose magnificent tail fins represent the automotive optimism of a decade when Americans genuinely believed that style and abundance were not luxuries but birthrights. In that family's kitchen counter change tray, among the quarters and dimes and nickels and ordinary pennies of daily life, sits a 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, freshly struck, blazing with original Denver mint luster, struck from a double die working die that nobody at the mint had caught during quality control, carrying on its small copper surface the potential for a value that would not be recognized for nearly 7 decades. That coin, forgotten in the change tray, eventually dropped into a coffee can with other old coins, ultimately inherited by children and grandchildren who never thought to examine it carefully, might be the coin that changes a family's financial reality when finally recognized and certified and offered at auction. Or it might still be in that coffee can right now, waiting for exactly the right person with exactly the right knowledge to finally pick it up and look at it the way it deserves to be looked at. The auction history of the finest known 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies reflects the full weight of everything we have discussed: the prosperity era historical context, the specific Denver mint production quality of the peak Eisenhower years, the era variety significance of the DDO and RPM populations, the condition rarity that makes truly pristine survivors so genuinely rare within a billion-plus production run, in realized prices that have consistently exceeded pre-sale estimates and consistently established new market benchmarks for what this date is truly worth. Major heritage auctions and Stack's Bowers Galleries events featuring finest known 1956 D examples in MS66 red and above have generated bidding competition of unusual intensity, phone bidder lists of extraordinary length, floor bidding of serious financial commitment, internet bidding from collectors whose research into the 1956 depopulation position has given them a depth of understanding about what is being offered that translates directly into willingness to commit the most serious financial resources available to them. The realized prices on these coins have set records that speak to the growing collector recognition of this date's specific condition rarity story, and that continue to influence market expectations for subsequent sales of comparable examples in ways that reflect the permanent and deepening collector consensus about the 1956 D's true position in the Lincoln set value hierarchy. And here, at the very end of today's extraordinary grand finale, at the conclusion of a video that has taken us from the Great Depression survival miracle of the 1929 Philadelphia at $445 million through the VJ Day emotional magnificence of the 1946 Philadelphia at $365 million, through the Sputnik year penultimate Wheat Penny drama of the 1957 Philadelphia at $252 million, through the Korean War MacArthur firing era, Denver production complexity of the 1951 D at $125 million, through the legendary San Francisco Mint final circulating production chapter of the 1950s at $67 million, and now to this final, magnificent 1956 D at $26 million. I want to leave you with the truth that ties every coin in today's video, every coin on this channel, every coin in the entire history of serious numismatics, into a single coherent and deeply human understanding of what makes this pursuit so extraordinary, and so genuinely worth the time, and the attention, and the passion that serious collectors bring to it. Every coin we covered today was made for the same purpose: to be spent, to be used, to pass through hands and cash registers and parking meters and vending machines until it wore away or got lost or simply disappeared into the entropy that claims most of the physical objects that human beings create in the ordinary course of their ordinary lives. The 1929 Philadelphia was made in the year the Depression began, struck by workers who had no idea that the economic catastrophe beginning outside the mint's walls would eventually make the coins they were producing genuinely precious for reasons nobody could have predicted. The 1946 Philadelphia was made in the year the soldiers came home, struck in a mint that was part of a nation that was trying to remember what peacetime felt like after 4 years of total war. The 1957 Philadelphia was made in the year Sputnik launched, and everything America thought it knew about its own technological supremacy turned out to be more complicated than it had assumed. The 1951 D was made in the year MacArthur was fired, and the Korean War found its most politically divisive chapter. The 1950 S was made at a legendary mint that was approaching the end of its circulating coin production tradition without fully knowing it. And the 1956 D was made at the absolute peak of American material confidence, in a year when most Americans genuinely believed that the future was going to be better than the present in every measurable way, that prosperity was not a gift but a birthright, that the tail-fin Chevrolet in the driveway and the new television set in the living room and the suburban house with the fresh-cut lawn were not temporary achievements but permanent conditions of a life that would only get better and better from here. None of those workers, none of those mint supervisors, none of those quality control inspectors, none of the Americans who received those coins in change at gas stations and grocery stores and movie theaters had any idea that specific examples of what they were making would one day be worth $26 million and $67 million and $125 million and $252 million and $365 million and $445 million. They were just making pennies, just doing their jobs, just participating in the ordinary commercial life of an extraordinary country at various extraordinary moments of its history. And time and rarity and human passion transformed what they made into something that none of them could have imagined, into objects that connect the present day to those specific moments with a directness and a physical immediacy that no other form of historical record can quite replicate, because they are not representations of those moments, they are not descriptions of those moments, they are not photographs of those moments. They are pieces of those moments, copper objects that were present, that were handled, that were part of the daily life of the people who lived through events that shaped everything that came after. Check your coins. Look carefully at every Lincoln Wheat penny you own or inherit or discover in the forgotten places where time deposits its treasures. Because somewhere in America right now, in a coffee can or a dresser drawer or a shoebox in an attic, one of these extraordinary coins is waiting. And today, having watched every minute of today's extraordinary video from the 1929 all the way to this final 1956 D, you have exactly the knowledge and exactly the understanding that you need to be the person who finds it. Thank you for joining us on today's journey through the Coins Explorer.